Hello again, and welcome to the Castle Old Skull Hawk Moor project, where we explore the deepest roots of Dungeons & Dragons in search of greater understanding and forgotten details that we can use to move forward into the future of old-school-inspired game design. The Hawk Moor project celebrates the world of Greyhawk, as created by Gary Gygax, as well as the world of Blackmoor, as created by Dave Arneson, and all of their gaming friends and co-creators. Today, we will defy the lords of copyright in the name of research, information sharing, and education as we explore the origins and secrets of everyone's favorite terrifying Dungeons & Dragons monster, the Beholder. Beholders are some of the most iconic and fascinating monsters in all of Dungeons & Dragons. For 50 years, they have terrified adventurers and players. They loom at the heart of many unforgettable tales of sword and sorcery adventure. They don't ever much appear in stories, but they always seem to star in player and dungeon master recollections of epic scenes brimming with life, death, and glorious battles that took place over the gaming table. But where do beholders come from? Who created them? They were not created by Wizards of the Coast, and they did not first appear in the Forgotten Realms. They first appeared in the world of Greyhawk. In today's episode, we are going to discuss the original creator of the Beholder, Terry Kuntz. We are also going to explore how Gary Gygax turned Terry's original concept into a classic monster, as well as many of the secret symbolisms hidden away in the design of this fantastical creature. Let's journey on and get started. The secrets hidden away in the eye of the Beholder are about to be revealed. In the 1977 Monster Manual, Gary wrote a credit to Terry Kuntz, who was never thanked for his prototypical Beholder, a revised version of which was included in Greyhawk Supplement 1 in 1975. Greyhawk Supplement 1, by the way, was published in March of that year. As Gary once said, to quote, "I can't take credit for the critter in question, as great a monster as it is. Terry Kuntz came up with the Beholder after he'd been playing in my campaign for about 2 months. Where he got the idea, I have no idea, but I latched onto it immediately, and with his kind permission, made it an integral creature in the Dungeons & Dragons roster of ugly customers to encounter." Unquote. We know more about the Beholder now than Gary did when he wrote those words, so let's explore the history of this fantastic monster in detail. Rob Kuntz, friend of Ernie Gygax, was one of the original players in the game that Dave Arneson and Gary Gygax were creating. In 1973, that game would take on the name Dungeons & Dragons. While the game was being created and play-tested, Rob's brother Terry became involved in a lot of those playtest sessions. One day, perhaps after a vivid dream, depending on the account, Terry wrote a short story about a new monster that he had imagined. According to his brother Rob, this short story has been lost for many years, but we do know a few of the details from their recollections. In this story, the new monster, called the Beholder, lived with its kindred atop a lonely mountain. This curious species possessed its own ecology and culture and strange familial hierarchy that humans could barely understand. As Rob Kuntz once wrote, "In Terry's conceptualization, beholders were ill understood and rare creatures living out a waning existence in forlorn and out-of-the-way areas." After Terry wrote his short story, he then wrote the Beholder up as a monster prototype for the game. Terry presented this game-oriented write-up to Gary Gygax and Rob for potential inclusion in Dungeons & Dragons Supplement 1 to be titled Greyhawk. Gary reviewed it and loved the idea. He immediately saw the potential in Terry's imaginative creation. Gary then decided that the core concept of a powerful monster was indeed there. In refining this concept for Dungeons & Dragons play, he apparently removed Terry's societal and hierarchical lore from the Beholder, keeping only the mechanical aspects of its magical rays, levitation, appearance, and fearsome combat abilities. Instead of being forlorn mystics, Gary turned the Beholders into deadly and evil enemies, the nemeses of adventurers throughout the Greyhawk underworld. He made the monster playable, but in smoothing away the rough edges, a lot of Terry's originality was lost. Gary did later add some lore to the Greyhawk Beholder here and there. For example, hidden away in 1978 Dungeon Module D1, Descent into the Depths of the Earth, we learned that Beholders are friendly with the Illithids, the Mind Flayers. This makes sense because both species are lawful evil, tyrannical, manipulative, alien, and highly intelligent. It also makes sense because both Mind Flayers and Beholders are somewhat Lovecraftian in their Dungeons & Dragons depictions, which, concerning the many celestial spheres of Yog-Sothoth, as well as the many horrible eyes of the Shoggoths who chanted to Kelly Lee, is something we will explore in more detail in the Hawk Moor History series another time. Although the chronology of such half-remembered events is always tricky to pin down, to my mind, it appears that Terry probably designed the Beholder concept in late 1974, perhaps after his graduation from college, and then presented the game prototype version to Gary, perhaps at the end of 1974 or in early 1975. On a related manner, we also read in the Strategic Review newsine, issue number 5, where Terry stated, "It wasn't until October 1st, 1975, that TSR Hobbies Incorporated offered me employment in their company to help design rules and games intended for the wargame enthusiast. I hope in the future that I may please a number of fellow gamers and designers with my own projects and or group projects through TSR. It seems likely that Terry's play skill as Tarek the Fighter, as well as his design acumen, as exemplified by the Beholder design, swayed Gary into making sure that Terry was hired by TSR at that time." The Beholder is also known as the Eye Tyrant, or the Sphere of Many Eyes. And when we look at the original art by artist Greg Bell, we can also see another forgotten early name given to these creatures that was written into the art, the Sphere of Doom. The iconic later illustration of the Beholder, with the large fanged mouth and staring eye, as portrayed in the Monster Manual, was actually crafted by Tom Wham. You might know Tom from his many classic games featured in Dragon magazine, such as Snit's Revenge, Snit Smashing, Elephant Hunt, and The Awful Green Things from Outer Space. There's quite a bit of interesting information concerning the creation of the Beholder that Gary Gygax apparently didn't know. Here are some quotes from an interview that Terry Kuntz kindly did for Casus Belli in 2017. There, he said, to quote, "I wanted to design a creature that could stand up to high-level characters and be able to defend itself equally well against fighters and magic users. The basic monster level should be level 10. The sources of inspiration are multiple: Dungeons & Dragons, Empire of the Petal Throne, mythology, Tolkien's novels, and objects of mythology. There is not one object in particular. The spherical shape comes from mythology and sun-moon relativity. I was looking for something that was different. It's more of a concept. On the other hand, when I think of the eye stalks, the first thing that came to my mind is the Medusa. These multiple eyes should allow the Beholder to defend and attack at 360 degrees. The eye stalks can be longer on some beholders, and the central eye is always the most powerful. Terry continued, I actually had some difficulty designing the beholder until we had used it in an adventure. The first difficulty was linked to the choice of the spherical body of the creature, which was to bring it some flexibility and good protection. The beholder also had to float above the ground, so I made it so that its levitation is original, natural, and easy to control during combat and while traveling. But during a playtest, I realized that the beholder was too weak due to the low thickness of its skin, but I knew that the levitation power would give it a better armor class. And Terry finished, I chose the power attributed to each beholder eye so that the DM could modify those as they wish. The power of the eyes is based on the level of the beholder. This monster was initially designed to be unintelligent, but as you know, in D&D, there are very intelligent ones as well. Unquote. When we consider mythological inspirations of the beholder, although Terry was not specific, we might, for example, consider many-eyed creatures such as Argus Panoptes in Greek mythology, or the depictions of angels in ancient mysticism, as well as the evil eye. Terry once also told a player that, quote, the origins of the beholder's magic and its floating ability are biological in form, unquote. The idea of beholders having specific magical powers, one per eye, was therefore certainly conceived by Terry from what he said in the interview. And later, as Tim Kask once noted, after the Beholder was published, it was pretty common for dungeon masters to change some of the powers of various Beholder eyes as individuals of the species were encountered throughout the underworld. And in considering the mystical conception of the Beholder, I want to draw attention to the symbolism of medieval celestial spheres, which, to my knowledge, has never been done before in regard to Beholder lore or Dungeons & Dragons history. Medieval sages and mystics appreciated the deep symbolism and beauty of the sun and the moon. These were considered sources of celestial and magical power. When we consider them both as magical levitating spheres of great majesty and magic, with faces inside them and emanating rays of power, we can see how they would inform the symbolism of the beholder as well. In medievalism, the sun symbolizes masculinity, authority, daytime, directness, reason, truth, fire, and gold. The moon symbolizes femininity, suggestion, nighttime, reflections instead of directness, madness instead of reason, dreams instead of truth, water, and silver. Together, the sun and the moon were regarded as brother and sister, god and goddess, as two mystical beings who need each other because although their natures are opposite, their one light is intertwined in each other's essence. They need each other, and they define one another as well. You might remember that I quoted Terry Kuntz citing J.R.R. Tolkien as one of the inspirations for the Beholder's symbolism. The obvious connection between the Lord of the Rings and the Beholder involves the malicious and lidless levitating eye of Sauron. This eye symbolizes arcane awareness, the persistence of evil spirit, and the ability to hunt goodness down to destruction from afar. Curiously, there is also a link to Tolkien hidden away in the Monster Manual still, where one of the major orc tribes is called the Evil Eye, and they have a crimson eye as their tribal symbol. But instead of making the orcish eye be about beholders, TSR turned a different creative direction after the Sol Zaint's threat of litigation in late 1977 over The Hobbit. Instead, TSR created the orc god Gruumsh for 1980 and Deities and Demigods, Ever since then, they have pretended that the evil eye that the orcs worship is the Eye of Gruumsh, and they completely ignore referencing the Eye of Sauron forevermore thereafter in all of their professional products. But to stay on track in this episode, let's get back to considering the Beholder and Tolkien's Middle-earth lore as a source of inspiration for that monster. Beyond the lidless Eye of Sauron connection between Tolkien and the Beholder, I would like to point out that the two trees of Valinor symbolize gold and silver, the sun and the moon. This is a medieval reference. The entire magic of Middle-earth, its creation, and the corruption of that shared light of silver and gold is based on Tolkien's interpretation of sun and moon mythology and alchemy throughout the ages. Tolkien built his entire cosmology on the sun, the moon, and the magics of light and darkness. Now, the rest of this is speculation on my part, but you might notice that the Beholder's eye powers are not just destructive in nature. Their magics also include charming, sleep, fear, slowing, and levitating telekinesis. Half of the sorceress eye powers are destructive, but the other half of the powers are manipulative. I think that there might have been an original design motif there, where both the sun and the moon were represented in the Beholder's eye powers with their opposed and intertwining symbolisms. Whether or not this was a conscious design decision made by Terry, I cannot say, but it does seem quite possible when we consider his comments in the Casus Belli interview. Beholders might not just be monsters. They might actually be mystical incarnations of the eternal sun and moon, physical manifestations of the powers of the celestial spheres. Possibly even the corruption of that light through ultimate darkness. If my theory is true, then the central eye would symbolize the moon eclipsing the sun, or the moon being eclipsed by the sun, more realistically. This would explain why the central eye has the ability to create an anti-magical ray, conquering all other types of magic except for itself. It is the unified power of sun and moon, the definition of a mystical paradox, and a perfect balancing of opposed magics through one all-mastering enigma. In closing out this narrative essay, I also want to share with you this epic scene from the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons official coloring album, illustrated by Greg Irons and written by Gary Gygax. I love this particular scene because it is the only major description of a Beholder battle in the world of Greyhawk, as written by Gary, that I know of. And it reads as follows. Wending ever deeper beneath the surface, the party eventually enters a vast underground cavern bisected by a black river. The chill waters run swift and deep. There is only one way to cross, a bridge of worn oak timbers sunk into the ochre stone. The very air reeks of malevolence, alerting the adventurers to certain danger. And danger there is. A beholder, a monster of great evil and power, blocks the far side of the wooden span. With their innate resistance to magic, the party's dwarves lead the attack. The dwarven champion, Ergui, is felled by a death stare ray from one of the 10 eye stalks of the beholder. Plummeting from the bridge, the stricken hero is swept away in the icy river, never to be seen again. Gary then goes on to define the colors of the beholder, because this is a coloring book. The most interesting detail here, I think, is about how the beholder glows from within with its evil power. An olive green sphere, this eye tyrant is covered in enormously tough chitinous plates. Between these plates, cracks flush purplish green, while highlighted areas glow yellow-green. The small eye stalks are a lighter olive with disgusting pink sockets from which green and orange ringed eyes stare fixedly. A huge central eye stares balefully forth. Yellow-orange jagged teeth jut from the pinkish mouth, ready to rend and engulf prey. Relying upon the might of their sword arms, the party faces and defeats the hateful beholder, sending it crashing down the stony slopes of the underground riverbank as a tribute to their fallen companion Ergui. And so ends the scene. I know many people will want to refute various details in this episode of Hawk Moor with, well, actually asides, because the Beholder is so iconic and has so many years of history behind it. And this is largely because the Beholder has become the monstrous mascot of Wizards, Dungeons & Dragons over the last 25 years. But here, in this historical time capsule, I am very specifically ignoring later innovations by Ed Greenwood, Wizards of the Coast, and various later designers. No offense, but my goal in producing this history is to preserve the original Beholder lore of 1974 to 1981, and to make a tribute to Terry and Gary and all the rest. This is a treasury of origin which tends to get obfuscated by the later, more commercial developments. And think of this as well. Everything that came later from other authors and designers actually makes the secret origin of the Beholder more difficult for us to understand. I hope you have found this old school lore for the Sphere of Doom rather interesting to behold. And that is all I have for you today. Thank you for listening to Hawk Moor. Until next time, enjoy your journeys throughout the wondrous lands of Greyhawk and Blackmoor and beyond. And be careful when crossing those netherworld bridges. I will see you all again soon.